This idea of not dying with your music still in you is really about an awareness that there is some kind of purpose. And that purpose to everything and to your life is not necessarily based upon something that we can figure out with our brain. Like, my purpose is to become an accountant, or my purpose is to find the perfect place to live or the perfect mate. I don't think it's done that way. It's never, to me, an intellectual thing. It's always something that's of the heart. When I ask people to point to themselves, they never point to their brain. They always point to their heart. And Gibran, the Lebanese poet, said that when you're born, your work is placed in your heart. There's something that you feel, and it's very hard to put it into words. In fact, I think it defies words, because words are just more symbols of something that we're trying to express. And it's the feeling that we have in here that I'm here, that I have a heroic mission of some kind, that there's something more to my life than just simply going through the motions and being a commuter and collecting a certain amount of stuff. So to me, not dying with your music still in you is what Maslow called the top of the pyramid. And you remember the pyramid of the self-actualization that begins with the baseline being the longest part, but the baseline is just taking care of basic needs. Like, you learn how to handle and provide for yourself. So you have to, at the very base of this pyramid, you have to feed yourself. And you have to have your needs for water, and your needs for food, and your needs for shelter as you move up this. And then your needs for sort of like companionship and ultimately a need to feel a sense of belonging, need to feel loved as you begin to move up this pyramid until you get to the very top. And at the very top of this pyramid, there's just a tiny little space up there. And this tiny little space at the top of the pyramid is what we call purpose, where you're living your life as if why you're here is really clear to you. A sense of purpose is not that I'm doing what I was told I was supposed to do, that was programmed into me by somebody in the sky before I showed up here, but that I feel as if why I'm here is being actualized. And when people ask me about how do I get to that place of purpose in my life, I always remind them that your life is like what Joel Goldsmith called it, a parenthesis in eternity. So who you are, Carl Jung referred over and over again to the part of us that is eternal, the infinite part of us. He said the telling question of a person's life is their relationship to the infinite. And until you have that relationship with the infinite, you will not know anything about purpose. So that you almost have to learn how to step outside of yourself and begin to witness yourself from the perspective of who you are as not being this thing that you're observing. You go to the observer, and then you even get to watch the observer. And that's when it starts to get a little bit complicated. But as the observer, or as the witness to the observer, you're sort of watching and noticing. But the sense of purpose comes from being that witness rather than what you are witnessing. And when you get to that place in your life, you begin to realize that who you are in this physical world, this name that you've been given and this body that you are occupying, is nothing more than a parenthesis in something called eternity. It opens parentheses at the moment of your conception. It closes parentheses at the moment of your death. But when you come into this parentheses, when you show up here, you show up with nothing, with no thing. And you go from nowhere, N-O-W-H-E-R-E, nowhere. And in one instant, conception, you're in now here, N-O-W-H-E-R-E. It's all the same. It's just a little question of spacing. Nowhere, now here. So now you're in now here. Hopefully all of you listening are in now here. There may be some of you listening that are not now here. But while you're in now here, you have some kind of an awareness that you're going nowhere. You're going back to nowhere. So it's nowhere, open parentheses, now here, back to nowhere. It's all one. But there's something different about now here than nowhere. At least we think there is, but we don't have any real confirmation about that unless you're Brian Weiss. Or you know about past lives or future lives and so on. Now, one of the things that one of the great teachers in my life, Carlos Castaneda, whom I've referred to on many occasions, one of the things that he says is that the problem with humanity living at ordinary levels of awareness is that we are all beings who are going to die, but we act as if we're not. So that we don't really ever come in contact with our immortality or our infinity at all, because we are acting as if this body is all that there is and it's going to live forever. When in fact, there's an awareness in there that we're all going nowhere. The first is that force always creates a counterforce. Force creates a counterforce, whereas power is always creates grace. Grace and power, over and over again, he reports the research, that power is something that will bring grace, that will bring God, will bring consciousness to the presence of it, whereas force always creates a counterforce. So that when you have a force, that is, if you react with shame, if you try to make your children feel ashamed, what are they going to do back? They resent, and what are they going to try to do to you? Some way of making you feel ashamed as well. It happens every time. You just have to watch it. You try to shame them and watch if they don't try to shame you. You said I couldn't do that, and you have to be punished for that. But you did that. You said this right away. Shame creates more shame. You've created a lowered energy field. They're weakened, you're weakened, and it works not just with shame, but with fear, with anxiety, with anger. Every time we use any of these, a counterforce is created. The second quality is that force is always loud, aggressive, whereas power is silent. That you raise energy levels through silence, and there's very little movement required when you are empowering, whereas when you get louder, screaming, aggressive, more outgoing, and so on. The third is that force is always moving against something. That's what force is. So whatever it is that you have, we have to move against it. We have to mobilize our forces and defeat it, whereas power does not move at all. The fourth thing is that force is always incomplete. Therefore, it must be fed energy. You must constantly feed energy of force. You must constantly be talking to it. You must constantly be upgrading it. You must constantly be trying to make it attract more energy. It's always demanding of energy. Whereas power is total and complete, requires nothing from outside itself. Power does not demand anything out there, not any weapons. It doesn't need any arguments to win. Power is that which you are connected to silently. The fifth, force always makes demands. Whenever you are in force, and if you look at any of those emotions and energy levels below 200, you will see that there's a demand to each one of them. Whereas power has no needs whatsoever. It is at peace. The sixth is force is constantly consuming. It has insatiable appetite. It is constantly demanding more. And in the process, it consumes, and in the process of consuming, it destroys. Power is always content, makes no demands, and needs nothing to consume. 7. Force always takes energy away. It takes your energy and takes it with it. Whereas power energizes. It gives forth. It supplies and supports. And it gives life energy. When you go to God, when you go to Spirit, when you go above 200 to any of those levels, what you are doing is you are energizing those around you and sending it out. Whereas when you're in any of the ones below 200, you are taking energy away. The 8th is that force is always associated with judgment and generally makes us feel badly about ourselves. Any of those emotions, any of those thoughts have to do with judging, and ultimately when you experience those thoughts or you're in the presence of someone who is using those thoughts, you will end up feeling badly or worse for the experience. Whereas power is associated with compassion, radical humility, and always makes us feel positive about ourselves. When you encounter someone whose thoughts are above 200, after that encounter, you will feel better for having been in their presence, based upon not just what you talk about, but even the feelings that you have. Whereas when you're associated with or around people who are using the techniques below 200, you feel yourself feeling badly, worse, and depleted of energy. Number 9, force always polarizes because it demands conflict in order to survive. Force and conflict go together. Power, the energy of power above 200 will unify and make you feel more like you belong, a sense of belonging. Number 10, I just put it this way, in force, the cost is always very high because enemies are always being created. Force needs an enemy. It costs to stay in a state of force. Whereas power has no cost whatsoever. It's absolutely free. It's graceful, it's silent, it's easy, it's non-consuming, it makes no demands. The 11th, and I've always been intrigued by this, the 11th quality or characteristic of force always requires proof because it's literal and it's therefore arguable. Whereas power deals with intangibles, and it knows that health is better than disease. It doesn't need any proof of that. It knows that honor is better than dishonor. It knows that faith is better than doubt, and that being constructive is better than destructive. And you don't need a chi-square, and you don't need an analysis of variance, and you don't need a statistical test to be able to prove it, and you don't need to argue about it. There's an awareness that is internal, that is instinctive, that says, I don't have to go out there and show anything. It's why it's quiet. I know it is better to be honorable than it is to be dishonorable. I know it is better to be honest than to steal. I don't need proof of that. I know that it is better to be healthy than to be in a state of disease. I know that life is better than death. I know this. I don't have to prove it. I don't have to explain it. I live in a consciousness of empowerment in which I don't have to go through and look outside of myself to validate whether these things that I know instinctively and intuitively are correct.
If I had a woman from Holland who came over to see me, whose husband had left her after 25 years, she had 4 children, and she just had been on the verge of suicide. And she was losing weight, and she was depressed, and she was taking all kinds of drugs for it, and she was getting sicker and sicker because she just couldn't get over it. And she came to a book signing that I was doing at a bookstore down in Florida. And she said, you've got to say something to me. You've got to say something to me that will help me to get over this. And I told her this line. I said, give up your personal history. Merge yourself here, now, into this moment. And those 25 years are something, if you want to understand how to do it, think of your past as, this hat. And this is your past. Now you can't just set this thing down over here and walk away from it and give up your personal history, because you'll always have it there to look back at. What you do is you pick up your past and you embrace it. You understand it, you accept it, as I had to go through these things that I had to go through in order for me to get to this place today, and the evidence for that is that I did. You don't need any more evidence. You did. And then you toss it. You toss it. You embrace it, and you toss it. And you merge into the now by giving up your attachment. And some of you have heard me use the metaphor of the wake. Alan Watts talked about the wake is not what drives the boat. The wake is just a trail that is left behind. That's all it is. And so is the wake of your life. And the wake doesn't make the boat go, and neither does the wake of your life the reason why your life is going in the direction that it is. The wake is a trail that is left behind, and it's an illusion to believe that it is the cause of your suffering or your struggles or your difficulty. Give it up. Let it go. Embrace it, understand it, get help doing that if you must, and then move into the now. Wisdom is avoiding all thoughts which weaken you. You know, every thought has an energy, just like everything else in the universe. And if you have a thought of shame, it will weaken your muscles. And what is your heart but a muscle? If you raise a child who believe in shame and feel ashamed of themselves, every time they think that shameful thought, they will be weakened. And if you have a thought of fear, and if you have a thought of stress, and you have a thought of anguish and anxiety, all of these thoughts and many more are the thoughts that will always weaken you. When you are having a thought that you know is disempowering you, shift it. Shift it to one that is empowering rather than disempowering. And the thoughts that empower are thoughts of neutrality and willingness and love, and ultimately thoughts of divinity. And when you see a troubled person who is out there struggling at the highest level of unity consciousness or God consciousness, or spiritual consciousness, you recognize yourself in all that you see. There, but for the grace of God, go I. And I am connected to that person. Changing your thoughts. I appeared on the Tonight Show many years ago, several times, quite a few times. And I remember coming home from the Tonight Show, and I was walking along the beach, and they had taped the show the night before, and I was out for a walk, and a woman who lived in the Northeast stopped me, and she said, "Didn't I see you last night on how could you be here?" I said, "Well, I flew the red eye, and I was walking along." She said, "You know, we're moving down here." She said, "What are the people like here? What's it like?" And I said to her, "Well, what are they like where you live?" She said, I live in a very big city." And she said, "They're very pushy. And people are not very kind. And they don't have time for you." And she said, "It's really not very pleasant." She said, "That's one of the reasons I'm leaving there." I said, "Well, that's pretty much what you're going to find here." That's basically what the people are like here. On the way back on the same day, someone else who had seen me the night before on the Tonight Show, who had lived in the Midwest, stopped me and asked me almost the same question. She said, "You live here?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, my husband and I are moving here and we're looking for a school." She said, "What are the people like here? What's it like here?" I said, "What are they like in Chicago where you live?" She said, "It's the Midwest." She said, "People are very friendly, they're open, they open their homes to you, they're very loving, they're very kind." She said, "It's a wonderful place." She said, "I love that. I'm going to really miss that." I said, "That's pretty much what you're going to find here." It's what you expect. It's what you think about that expands. It's what Emerson taught us. The ancestor to every action is a thought. Change your thoughts, and you change your world. Change your expectations, and you change around what you begin to manifest and see showing up in your life.
I have been accused over the years in the critical press of providing false hope to people. People will call, and I'll be on a talk show on the radio someplace in the world, and someone will call in who's been diagnosed with a terminal illness of some kind, and I will talk to them about not buying into the diagnosis. About why would you just listen to a group of people who have a vested interest in convincing you of this impending doom in your life, and the law that has ever allowed any miracle to ever take place in the history of humanity is still on the books. It hasn't been repealed, so that energy, whatever it is, whoever has ever healed themselves of a diagnosis of terminal illness, used the same kind of energy that is in you. And so people say, well, that's providing false hope and so on. And I remember. Again, to speak about Michelangelo, I mean, these people that I selected for, or that selected me for Wisdom of the Ages, I feel after studying their lives in depth and looking at not only what they had to say, but what they were like. I mean, I feel like you're talking about my grandfather or something when you speak about Michelangelo. And again, in Florence, when we went to Florence, I said, I'm just going to go see the statue of David. And I thought, well, I'll just look at this statue. Everybody has to see David.
Yes.
And I walked in there, and you go through this long corridor, and you see all of these slaves on either side that are coming out of the concrete that were all sculpted by Michelangelo. And then you come into this room that's all lit, and then there's this statue, this magnificent statue, and it's 18 feet high. And it is the most astounding thing I've ever seen. And I'm not a big art critic or even going to art shows and sculpture and all that. I enjoy it, but it's not something that I have a passion about.
Yes.
Well, 4 hours later, Michael, I was still standing in front of that statue. My wife and my 3 daughters were out there climbing El Duomo and buying shoes and doing all the things that you do when you're in Italy.
Right.
And they came back and they said, Dad, come on, we have to leave. And I felt like I couldn't leave that place. It was such a beautiful experience. I mean, you can see every vein in in this thing, and it's just a magnificent experience. So when they ask, there's this wonderful quote that they ask Michelangelo, how could you have created such a perfect specimen of sculpture from one piece of marble? His famous quote is that David was already in the marble. I just chipped away the excess.
Yes.
And that there's a David inside each and every one of us.
Yes.
And this idea of if you're, the greater danger is not that our hopes are too high and we fail to reach them, it's that they are too low and we do. And most people see themselves in terms, they don't see, I think you should see yourself as a saint. And I think a person ought to be envisioning themselves as capable of doing anything. I think it's possible to excel in every area of life. That is, you don't have to sort of restrict yourself to one area. I think you can enjoy going to a National Football League game in the afternoon and going to the ballet in the evening.
Yes.
When people say, well, you're a speaker, usually speakers, and you get paid a lot for speaking, so usually speakers are not good writers, or because one is introverted and supposedly and one is extroverted. And I have often thought, why can't you be a really fine writer and a great speaker as well?
Sure.
And why can't you be a great athlete and a poet as well? Why not? And most of these people, like Goethe and Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Shakespeare and Pope and so many of these people, these were people who were masters at 1,000 different things. Isn't that interesting? How we, like in medicine now, I mean, now you have a specialist who specializes in the right finger,
Right, exactly. Yes.
We have hand specialists, we have foot specialists and nose specialists, and imagine going to school for years and studying only the hand,
yes.
Whereas here was Da Vinci or Michelangelo, and they studied, they were anatomists. I mean, they studied anatomy, and were medical people, they studied, the way that Michelangelo learned about, how to do sculpture was by examining cadavers. They would literally steal the cadavers and go through, and he would examine them. And it's like when you discover the greatness that's in yourself, and not restricting yourself in any way. And not enough of us can think of ourselves as being able to excel in all areas and to have high hopes about virtually everything. Because high hopes is not just a song that Frank Sinatra sang with a bunch of kids. High hopes is being able to visualize and see for yourself what it it is that you'd like to be able to accomplish in your life.